Man, this has been the summer of Pablo Torre. He bested Bill Simmons in public beef. He dug into NBA betting scandals where most would turn a blind eye, and just recently began an investigation that led to the resignation of major players inside the NFLPA. It's a testament not only to the work that he's put in to make a successful show, but also to his staff and the people at Meadowlark that have dedicated real resources to a show that shouldn't really exist anymore. In a media landscape that punishes smart coverage, he's been given a platform to do some great stuff. Anyway, for those out of the loop, NFLPA Chief Strategy Officer J.C. Tretter and Executive Director Lloyd Howell have resigned recently due to the uncovering of multiple conflicts of interest and instances of gross mismanagement of the players' union. Lloyd Howell consulted for a private equity group that was approved to purchase stakes in NFL teams, a pretty clear conflict of interest. He also reportedly used union funds to pay for trips to an exotic dance establishment. Tretter, meanwhile, privately suggested that running backs should fake injuries in order to secure better contracts. Overall, it's a pretty shambolic showing by some of the most powerful men in sports. Who will run the new union? I have no idea. With an 18th game potentially in the cards, the players need a new voice that can lead with poise, impartiality, and strength. Will they get that? Nope. Because running the NFLPA is the worst job in sports. Here's why. First off, some background. Since 1983, the Players Association has had 3 executive directors. Gene Upshaw is a guy you need to know. A 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Raiders, who oversaw the arrival of free agency, a high-profile strike in 1987, and the creation of a financial advisor registration program to prevent players from being ripped off by shady managers. For 25 years, Upshaw was the man. Following on was DeMaurice D. Smith, taking the reins in 2009 after he lost Gene Upshaw to cancer. Smith oversaw the union during the 2011 lockout, a brief work stoppage that brought more benefits for retired players, but also cut the players' share of revenue to 47%, down from a roughly 50-50 split. D. Smith remains pretty controversial, maybe a little less controversial now with all that's happened. Lloyd Howell followed on in 2023, so he went from a 25-year stint to 14 to 2. Not great. So why is that? Well, I think it's important to listen to the players themselves. I was listening to the Nightcap podcast with Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco Johnson. At about halfway through a recent episode, Sharp said, "They're fighting for the wrong things," and later, "They're bargaining for petty privileges." Basically that when the players and the owners get together to negotiate, the players only care about the small stuff. The small quibbles over the number of padded practices and marijuana testing take precedent over larger issues like healthcare and guaranteed money. While I seriously doubt that players are more concerned with the former over the latter, it does point to a bigger problem at play. The fact that not all players want the same things. Because we always focus on revenue when it comes time to talk about collective bargaining. Revenue, revenue, revenue. Are the players going to get 50% or 48 or 51 or 47 or whatever? And look, that's obviously really important. 1% of NFL revenue over the course of a decade is worth billions. But there's so much more to figure out beyond how much total money there is to spend. Unlike most North American sports, the NFL has non-guaranteed salaries. And there's a pretty big divide between the rich and the poor. You have practice squad guys making a couple thousand on one end and 9-figure guarantees for guys on the very high end. That means different classes of players are incentivized to bargain for different things. Star players are more willing to hold out and bargain for more, whereas the rank and file are incentivized to grab a deal fast to avoid losing any checks in the event of a lockout. Every player gets a seat at the table, but there's 1,500 players sitting at 1,500 seats, and at the head sits an executive director who has to find a way to sort all of it out. There's a pretty infamous quote from the 1987 strike that goes something like this. Cowboys GM Tex Schramm goes up to Gene Upshaw at the negotiations and says, "Gene, here's what you have to understand. We're the ranchers and you're the cattle, and we can always get more cattle." Now, I'm sure that would never be said today considering it's pretty messed up and would leak to social media instantly. However, Schramm wasn't wrong. NBA, NHL, MLS, MLB players have overseas leagues to go to. The money's not always the same, but that option is always open in the event of prolonged labor strife. That's why we saw so many NBA players don foreign jerseys during the 2011 lockout. NFL players don't have the same option. And so, while they're waiting for the union and the owners to get to a deal, they still have expenses, they still have to pay taxes, and it's a pretty big reason why the 1987 strike fell through. Because these guys are running out of money, and the owners use that to their advantage. NFL players don't have the same options that other athletes have. This is the only league that they have. You also have this massive underclass of players that are only going to play for 3 seasons before they inevitably get replaced. And so this massive voting bloc is incentivized to vote for a bad labor deal, despite the fact that players as a whole are going to get a raw deal. If you play 12 seasons, missing 1 year is 8% of your career. A small price to pay for a deal you will certainly benefit from. If you play only 2 seasons, that's half of your lifetime earnings down the drain for some perks you'll never see. That's why the 2020 CBA narrowly passed, despite condemnation from the likes of J.J. Watt and Richard Sherman. Massive stars, smart guys respected throughout the league. Because even when those guys say no, there's a whole lot more practice squad guys willing to say yes. And so that's why I think this is easily the worst job in sports. You don't get the cachet of working in media or coaching. It requires leading a massive coalition of players, all with competing, overlapping interests. And finally, it means dealing with the most feckless, wretched hive of ne'er-do-wells this world has ever seen, also known as the NFL owners. I do not envy whoever takes over this job. Part of what made Gene Upshaw a capable leader was that the guy was an institution, and so when he moved for a strike or for a salary cap, the membership had his back because he was a living legend. Nobody at the union currently can carry that kind of cachet, especially not after such a chaotic summer. I think guys like J.J. Watt or Peyton Manning or Richard Sherman are certainly smart and respected enough to take on the task, but they're also smart enough to take better jobs, which they have, because this one really sucks. So yeah, that's where things are at. In all honesty, if the PA strikes out with bad leadership again, I could seriously see the NFL breaking the union and forcing the players to become contractors much like the UFC and WWE. It would be the highlight of Goodell's tenure as commissioner, an era defined by his battle to repress player power. That sounds extreme, but I don't see things getting better before they get worse. Will that happen? We'll see.